Welcome to the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live, where we offer the news, weather, traffic, sports, information, and entertainment our commercial drivers want to hear. I'm your host, Shelley Johnson. Good health is something more of our drivers are trying to achieve with their stressful lifestyles, and we like to provide them with helpful information. May is Skin Cancer Awareness as well as Mental Health Month. With me today to talk about these topics is Lindsay Bryan, Health and Wellness Manager for the St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund. Welcome, Lindsay. Thank you for being back on the show with me.
Thank you so much for having me again. I'm excited to be here.
You have so much helpful information. It's really great for our drivers. You know, I know skin cancer is a huge concern, but I'm not sure that all the drivers know what they need to do. They get more exposure than they realize when they're out on the road. And there's some serious statistics that you sent me. I thought maybe you could share some of those facts.
Yes, so this month is both Skin Cancer Awareness Month and also specifically Melanoma Awareness Month. And so I think one of the more surprising statistics is that 1 in 5 people will be diagnosed with skin cancer by the age of 70. So chances are, if it's not you, it may be somebody that you know and love. And so it's good for all of us to know, even if our risks are lower. Out
That's
of all,
high. That's really
it's
high.
very high. Yes, yeah, that's a big number, 20%.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge number. And um, another kind of interesting statistic that is part of that is that out of all skin cancer diagnoses, 1% of those will be melanoma. And unfortunately, that's one of the ones with the highest death rates. And so it's a very fast spreading type of cancer and can be deadly. And so, I want to focus on that one a little bit more today
Mm-hmm.
because our truckers have a pretty significant risk. So
They
one more
do.
statistic here for you is that 75% of melanoma is going to be diagnosed on the left side of the body. And if you think about our drivers, that left side, and really for anybody driving consistently, it's from the sun exposure. So coming through the windows, we get that exposure on our arms and sometimes in our lap, and it's increasing that risk very significantly.
I had heard glass provides somewhat of a protection. Is that not true?
To some degree,
Mm-hmm.
but probably a little bit more than we would like to give it credit for.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, we used to think so there's UVA rays and there's UVB rays. For a long time, we used to think of UVB as the bad one and UVA is okay. And what we've learned is that really they both have some significant health consequences that are both increasing that rate for skin cancer. And so UVB is the one that cannot penetrate glass. So that one is being blocked off, which is nice. That's the one that tends to cause um, sunburn. But UVA is still pretty risky. It actually penetrates deeper into the skin.
Yeah.
It's what we would see most likely in tanning beds. And it is still there even when it's cloudy outside. So it's kind of just always there, but it can penetrate the glass.
Okay. Yeah. I think some people think when it's cloudy, oh, not to worry.
Mhm. Yes, exactly. If anybody listening has got some sort of a like a fitness tracker or a smartwatch that tracks UV rays, it really is just keeping track of those UVB rays, because the UVA, they're consistently there. It doesn't change during the day
Mm-hmm.
with any significance. So when it says low UV rays, it's really referring to those low UVB rays.
Oh, okay. So that can be a little bit confusing and
Yeah, it's a little
misleading.
deceptive, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, being a redhead, I've always worn big hats, sunscreen, that sort of thing, simply because I don't want to turn into a piece of bacon. You know,
Hmm.
I have been accused of, oh, gee, you're going to be out in the sun. You're going to start smelling like you're cooking bacon. It's like, yeah, yeah, whatever. Yeah.
We all know that feeling of being a little too toasted, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I've had some nasty sunburns when I was a kid. Yeah, not fun.
No, no, definitely not. And so it sounds like you've got multiple of the risk factors
Mm.
that are involved in that higher chance of skin cancer, unfortunately. And I fall into that category too. So I'm unfortunately familiar with it as well.
Now, you said tanning beds increase your risk. I know a
Hmm.
lot of people like to go there because, let's face it, tans look terrific, but I've always been told they're not good for you.
No, they're not. And they happen to use more of those UVA rays that, like I said, in the past, we thought of as being safer. So for a long time, the tanning beds were marketed as here's a safer alternative to the sun. And unfortunately, it was really misleading, and we just didn't know at the time. But now we do know. And so that is one of the easiest ways probably to reduce that risk is just avoiding the tanning bed altogether.
Sure. Now, I'm seeing that sunburn can provide that can actually increase your risk.
Hmm. Yes. So having 5 or more sunburns, and this is in your entire life, so this is adding up from the time you were born, it doubles your risk for melanoma. And in
Oof.
fact, the younger those sunburns are, the greater that risk is. And so many of these, happen at a young age when we don't really know that we need to be avoiding the sun. It's kind of up to a parent or a guardian. So sometimes that risk is already there before we're really at an age where we're applying that sunscreen ourselves.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember my mother always telling me to stay in the shade when I was little. I was probably 3. I'm like, what's the shade? I had no idea because she always kept pulling me out of the sun. She's like, you need to stay in the shade. I didn't know.
Yeah. Well, and so she was trying to give you that life lesson, but yeah, it just probably didn't make a whole lot of sense at that age.
Mm-mm. No, my life experience was rather short at that point. So she showed me where the shade was, and that made a difference because I know I've had, probably at least 5 or more sunburns.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's definitely a risk factor is having that history of sunburns. And I think that's also something that has in the past been a bit of a misunderstanding is that many times people think, well, I just get the first sunburn of the year and then I'm kind of covered for the rest of the year, right? We get that baseline tan and we're a little less likely to sunburn. But really, ideally, we would avoid all of the sunburns, even that first one of the season.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now I'm seeing that risk factors, skin type makes
Mhm.
it plays a huge role in that.
It does, yeah. So for those of us that are on the pale side, we have less melanin in our skin, which does help to protect us to some degree. But we also don't want to, on the flip side of that, we don't want to trigger more of that to be produced. And so as we gain more of a tan, we're less likely to burn. But that tan is an indication that our skin is really trying to protect itself. It's been damaged and it's trying to reduce that risk. But that does. So the paler our skin tone is, the higher that risk is automatically. And of course, we know that because we're more likely to get burnt. So we're already feeling it.
Hmm. So actually, tanning is the body's self-defense. So that's not a good thing if your body's having to put up
Mm-mm.
a self-defense or a shield.
That's exactly right. What's interesting too is that those UV rays that we're exposed to, both the UVA and UVB, as they're doing damage to the skin in the form of tanning, it can start to alter some of our genetics that is designed to suppress tumors. So we start to get this alteration in the gene that generally would be reducing the risk for skin cancer, but we lose that protection.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a double whammy if we've already increased the risk and then also increasing it by reducing any kind of defense that our body has to protect us.
Interesting.
Mhm.
I had read that Coco Chanel was the one that popularized tanning many, many years ago because it was not considered something that was something you wanted. And she'd
Mhm.
gone to the Riviera or somewhere and came back to the United States and she was all tan and she popularized it. So everybody wanted to get a tan.
Isn't that
Years later,
amazing?
yeah, and years later, somebody interviewed her and she said, I wish I had never promoted that because
Oh,
but they didn't know anything about skin cancer in what, the
right.
1920s or whenever it was. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Hmm.
It does. It kind of comes in waves, the popularity of it. And I think it really did pick up when tanning beds got started and we originally thought that they were safer.
Yeah.
Everybody was going to the tanning bed. I remember that when I was a young teenager. put a sticker on to, show how tan you were when you removed that sticker. And it was a very popular trend at that point.
Sure, it was. Absolutely. Well, we do have to go to break here, Lindsay. I want to get into more detail in terms of what people need to know, what they look for skin cancer, the different types, and especially melanoma, which is something you really have to watch out for. We're talking with Lindsay Bryan. She's the Health and Wellness Manager for St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund. You're listening to the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live. Stay tuned for more coming up. The Truckers Network helps professional drivers save money and makes their lives easier. We were created for drivers by a commercial driver. We know the industry and driver needs. A Truckers Network membership offers exclusive discounts through our trusted partners on things like truck care, truck parking, tires, oil changes, fuel additives, fitness, roadside assistance, first aid kits, driver training, and a whole lot more. Start saving today. Check us out at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. That's app.thetruckersnetwork.net. The trucking industry keeps America running thanks to the 3.36 million professional truck drivers who deliver everyday goods to 80% of American communities who rely on trucking for that last mile. The industry represents a diverse group with nearly half of drivers at 42% as minorities. Trucking Moves America Forward, or TNRS, educates the public on the essentiality of trucking by telling the story of trucking and its positive impact on our economy, communities, and lives. Learn how you can join the industry movement by visiting truckingmovesamerica.com. Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live. I'm your host, Shelley Johnson, and I'm talking with Lindsay Bryan, Health and Wellness Manager for St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund. We're talking about skin cancer awareness because May is Skin Cancer Awareness Month. Lindsay, what is it that people need to look for when it comes to skin cancer? There's more than one type, right?
There's more than one type, but luckily we've got an easy way to remember what to look for that really applies for many of the different types of skin cancer. It at least gives you a starting point. And that is what we call the ABCDEs of skin spots or moles. It can apply to any odd anything that shows up on your skin. And so if we work through that, the first part of the alphabet there, A would be asymmetrical, which means if you were to draw a line through it and try to fold it in half, do those two sides match? So anytime you're seeing a really strange shape to it, it's a good time to get it checked out by a dermatologist. B would be the border. So when the border is uneven, like if it looks splotchy or very jagged, that could be a sign that something is growing abnormally, and that would be a good sign that we need to get it checked out. C refers to color. And so this could be a number of different things. If it's multiple colors, so if you're seeing like multiple shades of brown, but it can get into some kind of unusual colors, like if it's looking red or white, or sometimes it'll even have a bluish tint to it. Those would be signs of something concerning, potentially. D is actually two different things to look for, the diameter. So if you're seeing something that is larger than the eraser of a pencil, that small circle at the end, and particularly if it's getting bigger, we want to watch for something there. And also D for dark. If it's a very dark color, that could be concerning. Sometimes those moles or skin spots will almost look black. And so want to get it checked out. And the final one, E, is if it's evolving. So if you're seeing it change over a period of time, especially if it's happening fast, these are all really good signs. It's time to call a doctor and get in and be seen. And many times they're going to want to do probably a punch biopsy to be able to look at that tissue and help to make sure that it's not something concerning, or if it is, to see, okay, what do we need to do next? Let's diagnose it.
Mm-hmm. So people could think they have a mole, and it's not.
Mm-hmm. And it could potentially have started as a mole and then evolved into something else. So that's where those frequent sunburns can come into play and affect the mole, and then it starts looking different, and yeah, then it's concerning.
Mm-hmm. I know my mother had to have several treatments. It was she got squamous cell, which is
Mm-hmm.
it's a skin cancer. It was on her nose, and she had to have it removed, and it would come back. Was nothing. I mean, we were keeping an eye on it, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
but it kept wanting to come back. So you'd have to go into the doctor and have it removed, and they run tests and all of that, and it hadn't spread. But that was from obviously sun exposure.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that she was staying on top of it by
Hmm.
catching it before it had spread. That's really the benefit of keeping an eye on things and getting it checked out early and often, because the risk is that it certainly can spread to deeper in the skin where
Sure.
it actually may require plastic surgery to remove sections of skin.
Yeah.
And then, of course, worst case scenario would be that it has started spreading to other organs.
That's more typical of melanoma, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. And that's part of what makes melanoma more deadly than some of the other types of skin cancer is that um, it doesn't always look obvious on the surface. There's usually some subtle signs, but it can start spreading to other organs, unfortunately.
So it metastasizes.
Hmm. Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. Yeah. So
So
scary stuff. But
yeah.
again, these are easy ways to try to catch it early and often. And one of the things that we would recommend is to actually do a full body check at home once a month. And so that is just kind of scanning all over the body, looking for that ABCDE of atypical moles or skin spots, and then seeing a dermatologist annually. So you've got a second set of eyes essentially that may be catching something that you didn't catch.
Are regular doctors trained in looking for that as well?
Many of them are. They will be looking for kind of those same things, and they've probably had a little bit more experience in knowing what to look for, which is helpful. And so many times a primary care doctor will kind of do an overall look at things, but if there's anything that they're unsure about, they're still going to refer you on to that dermatologist.
Sure, which is a good thing. Yeah,
Yes.
because I could see the drivers going to maybe a primary care physician, not necessarily making an appointment to a dermatologist
Hmm.
if they see something.
Yep,
Um,
absolutely. And your primary care doctor is also going to be experienced in doing a punch biopsy. And so if there's something where they say, "Oh, that looks very suspicious. I don't like it," they're likely to go ahead and do that punch biopsy there in office. They're going to numb it up so it doesn't hurt. You don't feel a thing aside from that just initial numbing medicine, and they can go ahead and send it off and kind of take a proactive step in helping to diagnose it as they're referring you on to a dermatologist if needed.
okay. Now, does that leave a scar? I would imagine maybe a small scar.
It can. So with punch biopsies, they're typically going to, depending on how large it is, they may do a small stitch. Oftentimes, it's just going to heal from the inside out, and it can leave a slight discoloration,
Mhm.
but generally, a little neosporin is going to prevent it from being very visible.
Cool. And they do have things you can use to reduce scarring too. Scar away, stuff like
Absolutely.
that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. We've got so many great things with modern medicine that
Mhm.
help to preserve the aesthetic side of things as well.
Oh, sure. Well, there's money in the beauty industry, so they're always
Yes.
looking for that stuff.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So we have under 4 minutes. I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about the risks, and if we don't cover all of them, we can talk about it in the next segment. How do you reduce the risks of skin cancer?
Yes. So many of these are going to fall under one single umbrella of blocking the sun in various ways. So this is going to be your sunscreen, your UV wear, so things like hats and sunglasses and sun-safe clothing. We also have a really great promotion going on. We are partnered up with Arm Rocker Sunblocker this month to bring all of our listeners a discount on a sun shield. And this is just a nifty little device that tucks right in their window. It's super easy to install. So for anybody that's listening right now, you can go to truckerstan.com and excuse me, .org, truckerstan.org. And it's got the promo code right there, but that promo code is Truckers Fund. and that gets you 25% off of that arm blocker. So what's really great with this is that it tucks in the window and it is completely blocking both those UVA and UVB rays. But because it sits low, it's not blocking your view like a really dark tint on the window might, or like the sun shades do. So we
Mm-hmm.
kind of get the best of both worlds. It's protecting that left side, which is the most concerning part of our body that's been exposed to more sun, but
Yeah,
still with the safety features in mind, which is wonderful.
very cool. I wonder, would that also maybe block out some of the heat from the sun?
It absolutely can. Yeah.
Mhm.
So it functions similarly to a shade, like a pull down shade, and that it's blocking part of the window. So absolutely it would.
So it's arm rocker, sun blocker, and where do people find that again?
They can find it at truckerstan.org. And when they go to that website, they're going to see that promo code right there.
And they just put in Truckers Fund.
Truckers Fund. Yep, at checkout. So that gets 25% off of that purchase. And they have also agreed to donate $5 from each purchase to St. Christopher Fund this month. So just a nice way to give back to your fellow truckers.
Absolutely. That's terrific. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with the drivers.
Yeah, it was just a great partnership. They helped support us at Matt's with our silent auction. And with this coming up, I thought, you know what? This may be just the perfect opportunity to help protect some drivers from skin cancer along the way.
Absolutely. And you said hats and eyewear. What about eyewear? We've got about a minute. I wanted to cover some more of this when we come back, but UVA, UVB sunglasses?
Yeah, so really, if we can find one that covers both, and so many times we're going to see this listed as broad spectrum, and that's referring to both a UVA and UVB protection. And we can find this in sunglasses, and also you'll see that term on sunscreens as well. And so, same thing with clothing, that broad spectrum protection just helps to block out both of those types of UV rays.
So not all clothing will protect you.
Nope, not all of it, believe it or not.
How do you know if it's UV resistant, if you will, or good UV protection in clothing?
That's a great question. Generally, we can assume that most of our regular clothing is not going to provide any significant protection from both forms of rays. It really has to be advertised to protect from UV rays, which is just a very few, it's a small selection, but generally they are lightweight and airy so that it doesn't build up heat. So, I mean, they're designed for, okay, we're going to be out in the sun and we need to also stay cool
Mhm.
and protect from those rays as well.
You get UV obviously in the winter too. I would think a winter
Mhm.
coat, as thick as it is, would be protection, wouldn't it?
Yes, when we get on enough layers, we are getting some protection. We have to keep in mind any kind of parts of skin that are not covered. But
Mhm.
yes, you're absolutely right. Some of those thicker materials are going to be just fine.
Okay, good to know. And then in terms of sunglasses, don't you look for UV 400?
Yes. So the higher the better, really, with those. Just wearing sunglasses in general is going to provide some protection. You can think of that kind of like adding a film to your window. It's going to block out some, but you're absolutely right. There are some high ratings that make them just that much more safe.
Hmm. I don't think a lot of people know it, but I have read, and I think I had it confirmed with an eye doctor, sun can actually lead to cataracts.
Hmm. Yep, it absolutely can. It absolutely can. And, when we're outside in really bright light, it can also be what leads to some of those spots that we get, the kind of floaters that we get in our eyes. So just having that protection is important regardless of the UV rays.
Hmm. Lots to think about, but it's pretty easy to do. So
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just building new habits with safety in mind to help reduce those risks.
that's right. Well, I want to discuss more of this, but we do have to go to break. I'm talking with Lindsay Bryan, the Health and Wellness Manager for St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund. You're listening to the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live. Stay tuned for more coming up. TNCradio.live is proud to carry the Steve Summers Overnight Drive Show. TNCRadio.live is dedicated to commercial drivers. We offer the news, traffic, and weather you need, and the entertainment, sports, talk, music, and celebrity interviews you want to hear 24/7. We have original shows and trucker podcasts that feature some of your favorites, like Ice Road Alex Debogorski and America's Truckin' Sweetheart Marcia Campbell. TNCRadio.live is convenient and designed for professional drivers. The best part is we're free, and you can listen anywhere you are on the road. With just one tap, you can tune into Steve Summers and us right on your phone. Simply download our app by going to app.tncradio.live. That's app.tncradio.live. Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live. I'm your host, Shelley Johnson, and I'm talking with Lindsay Bryan. She's the Health and Wellness Manager for St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund. We're talking about skin cancer awareness because that's May. It's Skin Cancer Awareness Month. Lindsay, you said you had a correction on where people can purchase the Arm Rocker Sun Blocker.
Yes, I said it right the first time and then started questioning myself all of a sudden, but it's truckerstan.com, .com at the end. And that's going to take you to a landing page where you'll find that promo code, which is Truckers Fund, which gets you 25% off of that purchase.
And that's a sun shield for the vehicle, correct?
It is, yep.
Mhm.
Easy installation. They've got a video on there as well, but it just tucks right down in where the window goes. And so easy installation and also easy to remove.
Okay, so it's removable. That's good. Now, does it fit any kind of vehicle?
It does. Yeah, it does. It's just a little bit larger, more so for trucks. I think it would fit that better, but because of how it sits down in the window, really it could be used for any vehicle.
Mm-hmm. That'd be good for people with children too, I would think. You know, the kids, when they're in the back seat, in their car seats and stuff, they're getting sun too.
Yeah, absolutely. They make so many different like advertise for babies sort of things now with suctions on the window and everything, but it is something to think about because they're being exposed as well.
Mm-hmm. Something I learned, I had a kitty who had white fur. She actually got skin cancer, which I had removed and it hadn't spread, which was good. I was told that pets that are lighter in color are more susceptible to the sun.
Wow, I had no idea. Well, I've learned something new today.
And of course, cats are heat-seeking missiles. They love to sit
Yes,
in the window.
yes.
So, yeah.
Well, I'm
And
so glad you caught it early and that your cat's doing okay.
yeah, well, it was on her face, so it was kind of obvious. They removed it. You know, they took a little more flesh than I wanted them to, but hey, it solved the problem, so that was good.
Yeah, better
Mhm.
safe than sorry. Get clean edges on the removal.
That's right. Now, there's a lot to look at in terms of sunscreens. There's so many of them on the market. What do drivers look for?
Yes. So really, we can narrow that down to two different things. One of those being looking for the term broad spectrum, which, like we talked about, that just means that it's blocking both UVA and UVB rays. We want to make sure that it protects against both. And the other thing is that we want to aim for SPF 30 or higher. And just to give a little reassurance to anybody who's wearing a regular sunscreen, daily use of an SPF 15 reduces the risk for melanoma by 50%. So if you're somebody who is putting on a moisturizer that's got SPF 15 in there, don't think that it's not doing anything. It's certainly reducing that risk. But if we are actively being exposed to the sun regularly, and so this applies to our drivers or anybody who's outside on a consistent basis, we really want to aim for SPF 30 or higher.
I know that I wear at least an SPF 50, but I'm a redhead, so.
Truthfully, the higher the better.
Mhm.
There's a point where it doesn't make a huge difference, but that SPF is that number specifically means how much more protection we have from a burn than if we were using no sunscreen whatsoever. And so an SPF 30 means that it would take 30 times longer to get a sunburn versus wearing no sunscreen at all. So truly, the higher the better. There's nothing wrong with going with a SPF 50. Usually when we're getting much past that, we really want to be applying that sunscreen consistently. So if we're going with a higher number, then that means we're probably trying to push that time between
Hmm.
applications a little bit too long.
Sure. Well, people hate putting it on. A lot of sunscreens can be kind of greasy. People don't like that. But there are a lot of different brands out there. And you have the mineral sunscreens as well as the chemical sunscreens. Is a sunblock versus a sunscreen. What is recommended? Do you know?
They really both work great. So what's interesting is we kind of labeled them as like the mineral sunscreens and the chemical sunscreens.
Hmm.
They work a little bit differently, but they're both serving the same exact purpose. So the mineral sunscreens are more so reflecting those UV rays off of us, whereas the chemical sunscreens is just absorbing those rays in the sunscreen itself versus into our skin.
Hmm.
But both work very well. One thing to consider is if you were doing some sort of an activity that's going to have you in the water, then you may want to reconsider one that's going to stay on better. But just for the purpose of driving or being outside, they both work just as well. So it's just a matter of preference.
And should you reapply every 4 hours? I think that was kind of the rule of thumb I've run across.
Believe it or not, it's actually going to be a bit more frequently than that. So
Okay.
we want to start out by applying it about 30 minutes before we're even going to be outdoors.
Hmm.
That gives it a chance to absorb if it's a chemical one or dry completely if it's a mineral sunscreen. And then we want to aim for about every 2 hours from there.
Okay. And if you're perspiring or in the water, reapply, right?
Yes, exactly. Some are going to be just a little bit better options if we are in the water or sweating, but none of them are perfect. We are still losing some of that protection either way. So, yes, reapplying just as soon as possible once we're back out of the water.
Sure. Well, we don't want to live like a hermit. We want to enjoy Mother Nature, but obviously
Absolutely.
using some protection and some prevention, that's always a good thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, I do believe that there's more UV exposure in the southern climates and that sort of thing, where there's more sun. I know that with my camera, I remember going from Michigan to Florida, and I had to change the
What?
f-stop on it because it was so much brighter in Florida.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, are you actually
Closer.
getting more UV in that particular case?
Slightly more, we are. So the closer to the equator, we are just a little bit closer to the sun.
Okay,
And it can change risk statistically. Of course, there's a higher risk for skin cancer when we're living further south, but some of that is also, um, you know, wearing more layers of clothes up north and things like that. So it's hard to
sure.
say just how significant that difference is truly.
Well, I know people in the northern hemisphere, or the northern climates anyway, they have a tendency to have more of a vitamin D deficiency because they don't get as much
Mhm.
sun.
Yes. So really, if we were to find the picture perfect balance,
Hmm.
we would get about 15 to 20 minutes of sun exposure a day, which
Hmm.
allows us to develop that vitamin D,
Yep,
which our body can't produce just all by itself. It does need sun to do that. And we also get some really important endorphins and brain chemicals like dopamine that we talked about last month, and which are a feel good hormone. So there's certainly some benefit to it, but it's a balance. We got to
sure.
cut it off at some point and get the hat and the sunscreen and all the things to help protect us from those risks as well.
That's right. Everything in moderation.
Yes, exactly.
Now, this month is also mental health. Is it Mental Health Awareness Month?
Mental Health Awareness Month, that's correct.
There are a lot of things to consider with that. And didn't you say that today is Mental Health Action Day?
It is. When I was coming up with the topic for this month, I knew I really wanted to talk about melanoma, but it was hard to take up to pass up on the opportunity to talk about mental health, especially with it being the action day, the call to action to do something to make a difference.
Well, there's so many things, and our drivers don't always want to admit it, but they may have some issues, especially like with depression and that kind of thing, just because they're isolated.
Yes. Yes, they have some significantly higher risk factors, and that isolation is a huge part of it. But there are some other pieces that are kind of built into some challenges of their careers with being limited in their ability to exercise regularly when they're on the road. And even the dietary challenges can play a role in that as well. So you've got multiple factors that certainly make that a higher risk all the way around.
I know there's a stat here I wanted you to mention before we go to break. Uh, it was quite high. How many people experience mental illness every year?
Yeah, 1 in 5. So the same as the number that would be diagnosed with skin cancer by the age of 70. It's significantly high all the way around.
And
And
that
what's
surprises me.
yes, and what's even more surprising is out of that number, less than half of them are actually receiving treatment. So that's a lot of people that are experiencing symptoms that are not getting help.
Hmm. Well, I think part of it is not all insurance plans cover counseling, that sort of thing, which is
Mhm.
unfortunate.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge part of it as well. And I think that the overall stigma of mental health has improved, but it's still there. And I do
Yep,
think that that creates barriers as well.
it does. And certainly there's the financial barrier if insurance doesn't cover it. I think that's starting to change as more people say, look, this needs to be part of our coverage. Mental
Hmm.
health is part of overall health.
Yes, absolutely. We're slowly moving in the right direction, not as fast as I think many of us would like, but it is progress. There is progress.
Hmm. Yeah, because quite often they'll have like a separate deductible, I think, or just weird things on how they fund counseling sessions and that sort of
Yes,
thing. And
yes. Many times we see where they will cover a certain number of sessions,
mm,
and typically it's rather low, like 5 or 6.
yeah.
Which if it's a significant mental illness, then it may take more than that to work through it.
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, it can take a lifetime to develop an issue. It's
Hmm.
going to take more than 5 sessions to help reverse it or,
Right. Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
We have to go to break here, Lindsay, but I want to talk more about Mental Health Awareness Month. I'm talking with Lindsay Bryan. She's the Health and Wellness Manager for St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund. We're talking about both skin cancer awareness and now mental health, since May is the Mental Health Awareness Month. You're listening to the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live. Stay tuned for more coming up. The Truckers Network helps professional drivers save money and makes their lives easier. We were created for drivers by a commercial driver. We know the industry and driver needs. A Truckers Network membership offers exclusive discounts through our trusted partners on things like truck care, truck parking, tires, oil changes, fuel additives, fitness, roadside assistance, first aid kits, driver training, and a whole lot more. Start saving today. Check us out at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. That's app.thetruckersnetwork.net. Welcome back to the Truckers Network radio show on tncradio.live. I'm Shelley Johnson, and I'm talking with Lindsay Bryan. She's the Health and Wellness Manager for St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund. The month of May is both Skin Cancer and Mental Health Awareness Month. Today is Mental Health Action Day. We also wanted to focus more on some of that. Lindsay, what are the signs that people need to look for when it comes to mental health issues?
Yeah, so most of the most common things that we see is just a general loss in interest in activities that you used to do or used to be involved in. So it's like the joy is gone from those things all of a sudden. It can also affect eating habits or sleeping habits, and that can go in both directions. We may start sleeping a lot more or sleeping a lot less, just difficulty sleeping, and same thing with eating. Sometimes people experience a just feeling overwhelmed or feeling very irritable all the time. And many times they recognize this is not me, this is not my usual self, but they can't quite put a finger on what's wrong. It's just they feel quick to tears in slightly stressful situations, things that wouldn't have been overwhelming before. But I think what's interesting, what's important to know is that sometimes this can also present as physical symptoms. So this can be nausea, stomach pain, headaches, just this general aches and pains kind of feeling that's hard to put a finger on. And sometimes it's enough to bring people to a doctor's office. And the doctor says, well, I don't know, I can't really find anything. Your lab work is fine and there's no obvious injury. And that may be time to take a look at the mental health side of things.
Sure. And I'm not sure that maybe the doctors are getting better with that, but I'm not sure that's the first thing that they would even think of or even explore.
Yeah, and it may not be. Hopefully, you've got a doctor that's going to dig into those concerns and take it seriously, and um, but we'll still consider the mental health aspect because they both go hand in hand, really.
Sure. Yeah, our bodies absorb a lot of that stress. There's a book out there called Your Body Keeps the Score or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about a lot of those things. It's rather interesting.
Absolutely. There's so much involved in that, the brain chemicals and the stress response, and yeah, there's a lot behind it.
So now, do truck drivers have a higher risk for mental health issues?
They absolutely do. Some of the factors that we've been talking about just with the isolation significantly increases that risk. And, I think the general public got a taste of that during lockdowns and the pandemic. People were really struggling with that isolation. And this is a factor that truck drivers are dealing with on a week to week basis. I mean, this is the kind of a normalcy for many of them. And it makes it very hard because there's not somebody to say, hey, you feel down, are you okay? Whereas those of us that are out in public regularly and at home with friends and family regularly, we have that safety net, if you will.
Sure. I see there's something here that we need to reduce the stigma. Is there still really, you think, a stigma when it comes to mental health issues or?
Unfortunately, I do. I think it has become a lot better, certainly. But if you think about people that may be experiencing mental illness today, they may not necessarily have been part of this generation, but they were most likely raised by the generation that tended to sweep things under the rug of, oh, this is just a you problem, you're fine, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And they probably grew up hearing phrases like, well, men don't cry. Well, they
Right.
do, and that's normal. It would be normal to have an emotion that causes us to cry, whether we're male or female. And so, I think there's still this trickle down for previous generations, and we're learning more. But it can be hard and it can be really scary to reach out for help. And the fear of what is my employer going to think? What are my friends and family going to think? If things were to get severe enough and they needed to go to like a hospital for help. I think there's still that fear.
Sure. So I'm saying we should avoid labeling. I mean, those are always terrible. And when you think about it, there have been some awful labels when it comes to mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and so some of this, when we think about the statistic of 1 in 5, well, if it's not us, then it's probably somebody that we know and love. And we want to be careful with our words. We want to be careful not to label this as somebody just being crazy,
Yeah.
to be feeling tearful and overwhelmed because of mental illness doesn't make somebody crazy. They're experiencing real emotions. And so we just want to be careful with those labels. But some of that I think can be put on ourselves too. And this is where I use the term head trash. So
Hmm.
we all have these thoughts and beliefs that have come from somewhere, who knows where, that are just garbage. They're not true, but we will tell it to ourselves anyways. And this is things like, I'm useless, I'm never going to be happy. We just have these thoughts that can spiral very quickly. So we want to try to avoid that side of things as well. And sometimes that's self-imposed of saying things like, well, I'm just crazy. Well,
Yeah,
no, you're not
sure.
crazy. There's a reason behind it. And
Right.
and maybe that reason is more serious than we realize.
Yeah, sometimes we're our own worst enemy when we start putting ourselves down.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It becomes kind of a rabbit hole that can be very negative and hard to get back out of when we've heard ourselves saying those phrases over and over.
Sure. I see you have something listed here about the role of self affirmation. How does that
Mm-hmm.
play into mental health?
So self-affirmations are essentially the counterpart to that head trash.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a work in progress that I think really we all should be working on to some degree. But when we are finding ourselves saying some of those phrases like I'm just a broken person, when we're in what I call that deep dark hole and we're having that feeling, I'm just a broken person, I'm never going to get better. We want to try to reframe that in a way that recognizes what we're going through and also reminds us that this is not forever. This is a hard spot and it's going to be okay. And so this could sound like, I'm in a really dark place. Things have been very stressful
Hmm.
recently and I feel alone, but it's not going to be like this forever. I'm going to climb out of this deep dark hole and things are going to be okay.
Right. We have about 2 minutes left. Gosh, this has just flown by in this last segment. Where can people get help? I know that, do you have these resources on the St. Christopher website?
Yes, we have some great resources on there specifically meant for mental health. There are some telehealth groups that offer mental health treatment that you can find on our website at truckersfund.org. So that is a great place to start. And another one that I would recommend is NAMI, NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and they have got resources for somebody seeking help, somebody wanting to learn more, somebody wanting to try to support a friend or family member who is experiencing mental illness. It really covers all sides of things. So NAMI.com.
Excellent. And I see you have Everywhere Care on the go that with a promo code you can get, what is it, a $10 a month subscription?
Yep. So that's one that you can find on our website as well. But everywhere.care, they offer an assortment of telehealth services, both physical and mental health.
Hmm.
But they're unique in that not all telehealth services offer mental health. So we've got a promo code that we can offer, which is SCTRF. That's St. Christopher Trucker Relief Fund. And it's a subscription based service. So you have ongoing treatment and
Excellent.
anywhere on the go.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for being back on the show. I've been talking with Lindsay Bryan from the St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund. Super helpful information. I really appreciate it. You've been listening to the Truckers Network radio show here on tncradio.live. Stay tuned for more. Thank you for listening to another great interview on tncradio.live and the Truckers Network radio show. All of the material you hear on tncradio.live on our website, our broadcasts, or our podcasts are copyrighted. There can be no distribution without the express consent of tncradio.live and its partners. For inquiries, write us at info@tncradio.live. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast of the Truckers Network radio show.